so with that, let's get into this reading today. This is the Torah portion, Teitzei, and it begins at Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 10. I'll give you a second to get there. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 10. Okay. When you go out to war against your enemies, and Adonai your God hands them over to you, and you take prisoners, and you see among the prisoners a woman who looks good to you, and you feel attracted to her, you want her as your wife. You are to bring her home to your house, where she will shave her head, cut her fingernails, and remove her prison clothing. She will stay there in your house, mourning her father and mother for a full month, after which you may go in and have sexual relations with her and be her husband, and she will be your wife. In the event you lose interest in her, you are to let her go wherever she wishes, but you may not sell her for money or treat her like a slave because you humiliated her. If a man has two wives, the loved one and the other unloved, and both the loved and unloved wives have borne him children, and if the firstborn son is the child of the unloved wife, then when it comes time for him to pass his inheritance on to his sons, he may not give the inheritance due to the firstborn to the son of the loved wife in place of the son of the unloved one, who was in fact the firstborn. No, he must acknowledge as firstborn the son of his unloved wife by giving him a double portion of everything he owns, for he is the firstfruits of his manhood, and the right of the firstborn is his. If a man has a stubborn, rebellious son who will not obey what his father or mother says, and even after they discipline him, he still refuses to pay attention to them, then his father and mother are to take hold of him and bring him out to the leaders of the town at the gate of that place, and say to the leaders of his town, "This son of ours, he's stubborn and rebellious. He does not pay attention to us. He lives wildly. He gets drunk." Then all the men of his town are to stone him to death. In this way, you will put an end to such wickedness among you, and all Israel will hear about it and be afraid. If someone has committed a capital crime and is put to death, then hung on a tree, his body is not to remain all night on that tree, but you must bury him the same day, because a person who has been hanged has been cursed by God, so that you will not defile your land, which Adonai your God is giving you to inherit. You are not to watch your brother's ox or sheep straying and then behave as if you hadn't seen it. You must bring it back to your brother. If your brother is not close by, or you don't know who the owner is, you are to bring it home to your house, and it will remain with you until your brother asks for it. Then you are to give it back to him. You're to do the same with his donkey, his coat, or anything else of your brother's that he loses. If you find something he lost, you must not ignore it. If you see your brother's donkey or ox collapsed on the road, you may not behave as if you hadn't seen it. You must help him get up on its feet again. A woman is not to wear men's clothing. A man is not to put on woman's clothing, for whoever does these things is detestable to Adonai your God. If, as you're walking along, you happen to see a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground with chicks or eggs, and the mother bird is sitting on the chicks or the eggs, you are not to take the mother with the chicks. You must let the mother go. But you may take the chicks for yourself so that things will go well with you and you will prolong your life. When you build a new house, you must build a low wall around the roof. Otherwise, someone may fall from it, and you will be responsible for his death. You're not to sow two kinds of seed between your rows of vines. If you do, both the harvested crops and the yield from the vines must be forfeited. You're not to plow with an ox and a donkey together. You're not to wear clothing woven into two kinds of thread, wool and linen together. You are to make for yourself twisted cords on all the four corners of the garment you wrap around yourself. If a man marries a woman, has sexual relations with her, and then, having come to dislike her, brings false charges against her and defames her character by saying, "I married this woman, but when I had intercourse with her, I did not find evidence that she was a virgin," Then the girl's father and mother to take the evidence of the girl's virginity to the leaders of the town at the gate. The girl's father will say to the leaders, I let my daughter marry this man, but he hates her. So he's brought false charges that he didn't find evidence of her virginity. Yet here is the evidence of my daughter's virginity, and they will take the cloth before the town leaders. The leaders of that town are to take that man and punish him and fine him 2.5 pounds of silver shekels, which they will give to the girl's father, because he has publicly defamed a virgin of Israel. She will remain his wife, and he is forbidden from divorcing her as long as he lives. But if the charge is substantiated that the evidence of the girl's virginity could not be found, then they are to lead the girl to the door of her father's house, and the men of her town will stone her to death, because she has committed in Israel the disgraceful act of being a prostitute while still in her father's house. In this way you will put an end to such wickedness among you. If a man is found sleeping with a woman who has a husband, both of them must die. The man who went to bed with the woman and the woman too. In this way you will expel such wickedness from Israel. If a girl who is a virgin is engaged to a man, and another man comes upon her in the town and has sexual relations with her, you are to bring them both out to the city gate and stone them to death. The girl, because she did not cry out for help there in the city. The man, because he has humiliated his neighbor's wife. In this way, you will put an end to such wickedness among you. But if the man comes upon the engaged girl out in the countryside, and the woman grabs her and has sexual relations with her, then only the man who had intercourse with her is to die. You will do nothing to the girl, because she has done nothing deserving of death. The situation is like the case of the man who attacks his neighbor and kills him. For he found her in the countryside, and the engaged girl cried out, but there was no one to save her. If a man comes upon a girl who is a virgin but who is not engaged, and he grabs her and has sexual relations with her, and they are caught in the act, then the man who had intercourse with her must give to the girl's father 1 1/4 pounds of silver shekels, and she will become his wife, because he humiliated her. He may not divorce her as long as he lives. Nathan?
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Chapter 23. A man is not to take his father's wife, thus violating his father's rights. A man with crushed or damaged private parts may not enter the assembly of Adonai. A mamzer may not enter the assembly of Adonai, nor may his descendants down to the 10th generation enter the assembly of Adonai. No Ammoni or Moavi may enter the assembly of Adonai, nor may any of his descendants down to the 10th generation ever enter the assembly of Adonai, because they did not supply you with food and water when you were on the road after leaving Egypt, and because they hired Bilam, the son of Beor, from Petor in Aram Naharaim, to put a curse on you. But Adonai your God would not listen to Bilam. Rather, Adonai your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because Adonai your God loved you. So you are never to seek their peace or well-being as long as you live. But you are not to detest the Edomi, because he is your brother, and you are not to detest the Egyptian, because you lived as a foreigner in his land. The 3rd generation of children born to them may enter the assembly of Adonai. When you are in camp, at war with your enemies, you are to guard yourself against anything bad. If there is a man among you who is unclean because of a nocturnal emission, he is to go outside the camp. He is not to enter the camp. When evening arrives, he is to bathe himself in water, and after sunset, he may enter the camp. Also, you are to have an area outside the camp to use as a latrine. You must include a trowel with your equipment, and when you relieve yourself, you are to dig a hole first and afterwards cover your excrement. For Adonai your God moves about in your camp to rescue you and to hand over your enemies to you. Therefore, your camp must be a holy place. Adonai should not see anything indecent among you, or he will turn away from you. If a slave has escaped from his master and taken refuge with you, you are not to hand him back to his master. Allow him to stay with you in whichever place suits him best among your settlements, Do not mistreat him. No woman of Israel is to engage in ritual prostitution, and no man of Israel is to engage in ritual homosexual prostitution. Nothing earned through heterosexual or homosexual prostitution is to be brought into the house of Adonai your God in fulfillment of any vow, for both of these are aberrant to Adonai your God. You are not to lend at interest to your brother, no matter whether the loan is of money, food, or anything else that can earn interest. To an outsider you may lend at interest, but to your brother you are not to lend at interest, so that Adonai your God will prosper you in everything you set out to do in the land you are entering in order to take possession of it. When you make a vow to Adonai your God, you are not to delay in fulfilling it, for Adonai your God will certainly demand it of you, and your failure to do so will be your sin. If you choose not to make a vow at all, that will not be a sin for you. But if a vow passes your lips, you must take care to perform it according to what you voluntarily vowed to Adonai your God, what you promised in words spoken aloud. When you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat enough grapes to satisfy your appetite, but you are not to put any in your basket. When you enter your neighbor's field of growing grain, you may pluck ears with your hand, but you are not to put a sickle to your neighbor's grain. Suppose a man marries a woman and consummates the marriage, but later finds her displeasing, because he has found her offensive in some respect. He writes her a divorce document, gives it to her, and sends her away from his house. She leaves his house, goes and becomes another man's wife, but the second husband dislikes her and writes her a get, gives it to her, and sends her away from his house. Or the second husband whom she married dies. In such a case, her first husband who sent her away may not take her again as his wife, because she is now defiled. It would be detestable to Adonai, and you are not to bring about sin in the land Adonai your God is giving you as your inheritance. If a man has recently married his wife, he is not to be subject to military service. He is to be free of external obligations and left at home for 1 year to make his new wife happy. No one may take a mill or even an upper millstone as collateral for a loan, because that would be taking as collateral the debtor's very means of sustenance. If a man kidnaps any of his brothers, fellow members of the community of Israel, and makes him his slave or sells him, that kidnapper must die. In this way, you will put an end to such wickedness among you. When there is an outbreak of Sarat, be careful to observe and do just what the Kohanim, who are Leviim, teach you. Take care to do as I ordered them. Remember what Adonai your God did to Miriam on the road after you left Egypt. When you make any kind of loan to your neighbor, you are not to enter his house to take his collateral. You must stand outside, and the borrower will bring the collateral outside to you. If he is poor, you are not to go to bed with what he gave as collateral in your possession. Rather, you must restore the pledged item at sunset. Then he will go to sleep wearing his garment and bless you. This will be an upright deed of yours before Adonai your God. You are not to exploit a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether one of your brothers or a foreigner living in your land, in your town. You are to pay him his wages the day he earns them, before sunset, for he is poor and looks forward to being paid. Otherwise he will cry out against you to Adonai, and it will be your sin. Fathers are not to be executed for their children, nor are children to be executed for their fathers. Every person will be executed for his own sin. You are not to deprive the foreigner or the orphan of the justice which is his due, and you are not to take a widow's clothing as collateral for a loan. Rather, remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and Adonai your God redeemed you from there. That is why I am ordering you to do this. When harvesting the grain in your field, if you forgot a sheaf of grain there, you are not to go back and get it. It will remain there for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow, so that Adonai your God will bless you in all the work you do. When you beat your olive tree, you are not to go back over the branches again. The olives that are left will be for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow. When you gather the grapes from your vineyard, you are not to return and pick the grapes a second time. What is left will be for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. That is why I am ordering you to do this. If people have a dispute, seek its resolution in court, and the judges render a decision in favor of the righteous one and condemning the wicked one. Then, if the wicked one deserves to be flogged, the judge is to have him lie down and be flogged in his presence. The number of strokes is to be proportionate to his offense, but the maximum number is 40. He is not to exceed this. If he goes over this limit and beats him more than this, your brother will be humiliated before your eyes. You are not to muzzle an ox when it is treading out the grain. If brothers live together and one of them dies childless, his widow is not to marry someone unrelated to him. Her husband's brother is to go to her and perform the duty of a brother-in-law by marrying her. The first child she bears will succeed to the name of his dead brother, so that his name will not be eliminated from Israel. If the man does not wish to marry his brother's widow, then his brother's widow is to go up to the gate, to the leaders, and say, "My brother-in-law refuses to raise up for his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother for me." The leaders of his town are to summon him and speak to him. If, on appearing before them, he continues to say, "I don't want to marry her," then his brother's widow is to approach him in the presence of the leaders, pull his sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and say, "This is what is done to the man who refuses to build up his brother's family." From that time on, his family is to be known in Israel as the family of the man who had his sandal pulled off. If men are fighting with each other, and the wife of one comes up to help her husband get away from the man attacking him by grabbing the attacker's private parts with her hand, you are to cut off her hand. Show no pity. You are not to have in your pack 2 sets of weights, one heavy, the other light. You are not to have in your house 2 sets of measures, one big, the other small. You are to have a correct and fair weight, and you are to have a correct and fair measure, so that you will prolong your days in the land Adonai your God is giving you. For all who do such things, all who deal dishonestly, are detestable to Adonai your God. Remember what Amalek did to you on the road as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you by the road, attacked those in the rear who were exhausted and straggling behind when you were tired and weary. He did not fear God. Therefore, when Adonai your God has given you rest from all your surrounding enemies in the land Adonai your God is giving you as your inheritance to possess, you are to blot out all memory of Amalek from under heaven. Don't forget. Amen.
Okay. We took this unusual step of reading all 5 chapters of today's Torah portion because they're so powerful. They're so important for forming a set of guidelines for us to live by. Torah portion Teitzei means when you go out to war. However, war is just a small fraction of what these passages discuss. I recall thinking as I was preparing this lesson, how am I ever going to find the words to explain the profound, the far-reaching impact of these laws of God to modern-day believers? Perhaps more importantly, how are we to think about practically applying these ancient laws to our modern lives? Now, this is one of those places in the Bible that's akin to a major highway intersection, because it is where so much comes together and where one must decide which direction you're going to take. When a new annual Torah portion reading cycle begins, starting with Genesis 1:1, it takes nearly a full year to get to this point, right where we are today in the Torah. And it's a long road. It's a road that necessarily must be traveled because much understanding is developed so that some of the more challenging and underlying concepts that spread out and just engulf this section of the Torah can be properly illuminated for us. And yet, how much time we have together, how much focus we can maintain for how long before we drift off. That has to be taken into consideration. So my challenge is teaching Torah, and it's always been about how many layers of that onion to peel back at any given moment before enough's enough. And then it's time to move on. And this Torah portion is especially difficult to know what to cherry pick from, all right, for us to discuss out of the many equally important principles that's being presented. Now, there's also another underlying issue of how to deal with the contents of this part of Moses' sermon in a way that isn't so offensive to our Western sensibilities that our ears simply close to it. Because one of the chief topics here, and in far more of the Bible than you might ever think, is the matter of human sexuality. The Gentile translators of the Old Testament, as we read it today in English, were for the most part refined, urban Europeans, and they brought with them, of course, this reserved and puritanical European Christian mindset, unfortunately as well, a not so hidden disdain for all things Jewish. Therefore, so much of the sexual content that is inherent in God's word is greatly masked, and we miss it. Maybe that accounts for what we see going on around us all today as regards human sexuality, gender identity, all this kind of stuff. Because it's just covered over by the way our Bibles read or by the way it's spoken of in our congregational settings. See, there's also another underlying issue of how to deal with the contents of this part of Moses' sermon in a way that isn't so offensive to our Western sensibilities that our ears just simply close to it. Because one of the chief topics here is this matter of human sexuality. If we were to categorize the topics of this portion, there would probably be 4 of them in number: holy war, sex and family, care for the poorest and most vulnerable, and general humanitarian concerns. All of this revolves around the issue of loving our fellow man, loving our neighbor. But I think another way to look at it is that God is instructing Israel on the issue of fundamental fairness. Fundamental fairness in all the elements of life that we're all likely to encounter on earth. This matters even when it comes to fairness in war, when inevitably there will be the victors and there will be the vanquished. Now, we discussed the matter of justice in last week's Torah portion. And one product of justice is fairness. And when we think about fairness, biblically, it is one of the virtues that we are to adopt in our lives as godliness. And it's, I think it's kind of comical that fairness is perhaps the earliest virtue that becomes important to us from the time we were very young children. Who among us didn't have tears running down our cheeks in our youth when we complained to our parents of the unfairness of something we have to do that our brother or sister doesn't have to do, or that they got to do that we didn't? My wife reminds me how unfair she thought it was that she always had to do the dishes, but her younger brother never did. I recall when I was very young, the unfairness that my younger brother received as a birthday gift. Oh, I have to tell you, this was great. It was a dazzling pair of chromed and fake ivory-handled 6 guns. Complete complete with embossed leather holster and gun belt. He even had spare bullets in it. Something which I didn't have, but I coveted that. I doubt any of us have to search our memories very hard to come up with a few instances of when we thought things were unfair to us. And these have stayed with us all of our days. You know, the matter of fairness seems to take on more and more importance in everyday life, even as we get older. In fact, I would dare say that fundamental fairness plays a role up to and including international politics. So, now for the $64,000 question, which a lot of you have no idea what I just meant by that. How do we define and determine what is fair? What is not fair? Especially as believers, it's our duty to look to God as the definer of fairness. And in today's Torah portion, he tells us what is fair in war and sexual relations between men and women, in the family, and in society in general, especially as it concerns the poorest and the most vulnerable. When God tells us what is fair, he is telling us what is righteous. And in telling us what is righteous, he's telling us what is moral. Therefore, fairness is directly connected to morality. Fairness is not about our preferences, although it seems most of the time our own preferences tend to become the basis for deciding it. Fairness, according to God, is the proper outward expression of morality. Unfairness is not. In God's eyes, fairness is not optional. It is also not customizable, individual by individual. Fair is good, unfair is wicked. So fundamental fairness is far more a matter of obedience to God's commandments than merely how to best settle a squabble among children arguing over the use of a toy, or who gets to be first in a game, or even as an issue of niceness and politeness. It is most interesting, at least to me, how fairness is the battle cry of so many special interest or identity groups in the modern West. Fairness. It's not fair that one group of workers gets to work remotely, but the other has to go to work. It's not fair that two men or two women who love each other can't be deemed among everyone in society as legitimately married and the union considered as good and healthy, a thing that ought to be applauded. It's not fair that a CEO of a large company ought to make $20 million a year, but so many of the company's workers make barely over minimum wage. It's not fair that your kid can be homeschooled or go to a private school, but my kid has to attend public school because I don't make as much money as you do. Or I'm a single parent household, therefore my children can't be homeschooled. On and on it goes. So, why is it that in every one of these issues, and hundreds more, there are two opposing sides that just can't agree on what's fair? Why is that? Shouldn't we all be able to see it the same way? See, this matter of fairness used to be argued and debated mainly in the arena of politics. Now it has bled over into the arena of religion. Okay. How is it that two churchgoers can see an issue of fairness in any or all of these matters in totally opposite ways? How's that possible? It's because each is going on their own definition of fairness. See, the objective standard of morality and fairness is defined by the law of Moses. But this has been abolished by the church. Since God demands fundamental fairness, then how do we know what is fairness and how do we achieve it? As a person that was raised and saved in the church, fairness was dealt with according to one simple principle, something we all know, and it's called the Golden Rule. That rule was, do unto others as you would have it done unto you. This was said to embody the new one rule law that Christ gave to his followers. Love. On the surface, it sounds really good. Sadly, however, this proverb about fairness must have a context, or it just can't be carried out. Where did this proverb come from? We actually do find it in the Bible. It's in the book of Matthew. However, as happens so very often within the Christian faith, only part of the passage is quoted from the pulpit, and it's lifted out of its context in order to validate an existing doctrine. Here is Christ's full quote in Matthew from the well-known and widely used NAS Bible version. Therefore, however you want people to treat you, so treat them, for this is the law and the prophets. Oh my. The complete Jewish Bible says more or less the same, but it's just a bit more literal in how it's translated. It says, always treat others as you would have them to treat you. That sums up the teaching of the Torah and the prophets. Odd, isn't it, that only the first half of this verse is quoted and enshrined as a Christian doctrine, even as a doctrine of Western society in general. But the remainder of that same verse seems to be left out, if not buried. See, that is how we are to treat others that we expect in return. How we are to determine what is fair is, according to Christ, expressed where? In the law of Moses and in the prophets. No wonder just a few verses earlier from what I read to you in Matthew 5:17 through 19, Yeshua reminded his listeners as he spoke a Sermon on the Mount, he did not come to abolish the Torah or the prophets. Because if he had done that, it necessarily would have involved a complete change of standard of what had been fair and moral from the moment of creation to the day that he spoke that message to thousands on a hill above the Galilee. So according to Yeshua, there is indeed an enduring objective standard that Yehovah has given to his followers that gets very specific about what fairness is and it is not. And since the law of Moses is God's divinely given code of morality for humanity, we cannot then escape two different facts, or two connected facts, actually. First, fairness and morality are essentially cut from the same cloth. They can't be separated. And second, we cannot know. Therefore, we cannot carry out God's standard of fairness and morality unless we know and obey the Torah and the prophets. Just simple logic. Now, because the Constantinian church, established in the 4th century AD, was designed to overthrow the Hebrew faith that Jesus and the apostles originally taught in exchange for a series of Gentile-oriented doctrines, then at that moment, the God-ordained standard for fairness and for morality was also overthrown, and a new, ever-evolving man-made standard was instituted. A standard that, as history has proven, turns out to be no standard at all, or we wouldn't have these arguments. The standard that is originally given in the Torah was objective. It was completely rational. It was exchanged for a new subjective standard that is inevitably evolved into something a lot less rational, and therefore has splintered into hundreds of factions and belief systems, because that's exactly what subjectivity always leads to. Now, our Torah portion today about fundamental fairness first addresses fairness in war. That, of course, has been replaced by the human-created Geneva Convention that is regularly amended. Next, the fairness of what happens in wars concerns captured women is addressed. And God says these women are to be treated with dignity and respect, not to be used as disposable sex toys. All right? And they have human rights that they are to be carefully guarded and observed. And after that, the issue switches to love and marriage and continues with fairness between a man who has two wives. One's the most loved, the other the least loved. But that is to have no bearing on the status of the children born to them as regards the firstborn. This is all important because this directly reflected the economic status that woman would live out, especially if her husband divorced her or he died. Then fairness of how to deal with a son who's a rebel, a son who refuses to accept his duties as a son and as a man, and is essentially, he's just a no-good drunkard. And out of fairness to the community, the son is to be executed. Otherwise, he'll just continue to bring wickedness upon the innocent of that community. That is, he will of course harm others. He will be a burden to his parents and to the community rather than be a contributing asset as he was intended to be. What is fair in the arena of judicial punishment comes next. And it espouses the principle of proportionate punishment. Lex talionis. That is, the punishment must be in proportion to the seriousness of the crime. Next in chapter 22 is the matter of fairness when you see a neighbor's animal stray, that you alert him to it, and if you can, capture it and return it to him. That is, sorry folks, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. God says that's not fair. On and on it goes, even to the point of discussing fundamental fairness as concerns sexual behavior, especially deviant sexual behavior, and how it's defined. In chapter 23, the matter of what a poor person who is hungry might do to obtain food is discussed, again, within the context and boundaries of fairness. He may go into his neighbor's vineyard and eat some grapes to satisfy his hunger, but he can't take a basket with him and fill it up. Same goes for someone that goes into a grain field. He can eat some of the grain, but he can't fill a full basket and take it home. Even the matter of fairness in divorce is dealt with to open chapter 24. A man most certainly may become dissatisfied with his wife and divorce her, but as bad as that is, it must be done in a way to protect her from being thrown into poverty. A bit later comes the issue of fairness in money and business. The one who will need money the most is a poor person. But they will also necessarily have the least to offer as collateral. Thus, while it is fair to expect some collateral to guarantee that the loan will be paid back, even from a poor person, the person doing the loaning cannot enter the borrower's home and forcibly take that collateral from him. However, the borrower is obligated to take that promised collateral outside and give it to the lender. On the other hand, if the collateral is something like a blanket that person needs to stay warm at night, because that may well be the only thing of value that person even has, then the blanket may be held by the lender during the day, but it must be returned to that borrower before nightfall so he won't be cold. Towards the end of chapter 25, the issue of fairness in buying and selling is dealt with. Fairness demands that transactions be conducted honestly. It would be rather easy for a merchant to have an alternate set of weights and measures that he can use to cheat an unsuspecting buyer. The bottom line is this: there ought not to be numerous or subjective fairness standards. There's only one source that ought to be used to determine that standard. And by the way, doubly so for all believers. And that's the law of Moses. If one considers the law of Moses as irrelevant to their life or to their faith, then despite any claims to the contrary, they have left themselves with no objective standard of fairness. None. Other than the one they have invented in their own minds, which no doubt will evolve and it will revolve around what benefits them the most in any given situation, or perhaps what feels right to them at the time. There's a word for this in the Bible. It's called sin.
For more teaching and information, visit us online today. Come and be a part of our fellowship. Here at The Seed, enjoy worshiping and learning God's Word with us.